Breath of the Wild Master Mode. In concept, it sounds really fun, a more challenging way to play through Breath of the Wild. But in execution, it leaves a lot to be desired, especially when compared to other similar modes in the series. Now before you leave your dislike and click off, hear me out. Master Mode is Breath of the Wild's hard mode. It was added as the first wave of DLC for the expansion pass, and it brought another way to play Breath of the Wild for more experienced players, or players looking for more of a challenge. Now, this concept of harder game modes isn't anything new to the Zelda series, as past titles in the series have had harder versions of the main game, and this even dates to the very first Zelda game ever released. With the original Legend of Zelda for the NES, you can play through the game's second quest, in which the game would change the world's dungeons and item placements while increasing the difficulty. This was unlocked after completing the original game and starting a new game on that same file, though you could actually unlock it immediately if you name your file name Zelda. I feel bad for anyone actually named Zelda and had to play through the second quest without knowing. It was pretty ambitious for one of the first games to utilize save files, as most games at the time were far more archaic and mainly focused on high scores. So Nintendo really went all out on the very first Zelda game with replayability. And the series' second game to be released, The Adventure of Link, took the second quest concept a step further, with allowing the player to keep all of Link's spells and levels from the previous playthrough and carry it on to the next, acting more as a new game plus rather than hard mode. The concept of a second quest didn't make its way back into the series until the release of the Wind Waker. While in between that, we did have the linked game feature in the Oracle games. This was more about linking the two games together rather than giving the game a second quest. Regardless, the Wind Waker was the first to bring back the second quest after completing its main game. This mode had Link remain in his Outset Island gear throughout the entirety of the game, as Link's hero tunic was invisible this time around. Either way, this really helped distinguish the two versions of the game, which I personally really liked, as it seemed so weird to see Link in a different outfit than his iconic green one throughout the entire game. That is, until Breath of the Wild changed everything up. Though instead of making the game harder, it stayed the same, with only changing the sunken treasure locations. The main reason for playing the second quest outside the outfit change was to allow Link to keep his Picto Box, as they were used to take photos of characters and enemies to unlock them as figurines throughout the game's gallery. So if you didn't manage to snap a photo of a boss before defeating them, all that progress carried over to your second quest, giving you another chance. Overall, this version of a second quest was still a really unique mode for the series, as it made coming back to the game feel different, even if in just small ways. And I can't deny that the outfit played a big part in that. This honestly made me wish games like Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword would have carried this concept and had a second quest in which Link remained in his Ordon and Skyloft attire throughout each game respectively. Sadly, Twilight Princess didn't get any version of a second quest, and Skyward Sword changed that concept into Hero Mode. Heroes Mode was also given to the player after completing the main game, and sort of became the new standard of the series' second quest mode. This time it made the game harder by not allowing Link to find hearts throughout the game, along with having Link take double the damage when hit. And this would be the hero mode we'd see in the HD re-releases of The Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, along with games like A Link Between Worlds and the Link's Awakening remake for the Nintendo Switch. Overall, it was a far more simplified version of the second quest, while not really adding much besides increased difficulty. Though in Skyward Sword, the game that first got Hero Mode, it also had a few additional perks, like letting Link keep all his material from his previous file, which was actually such a nice feature, as you could really set yourself up for immediate upgrades when jumping into Hero Mode. Another really cool feature was that it kept Link's Skyward strike speed to build up just as fast as it did towards the end of the game. Honestly, making this game's hero mode somewhat feel like a second quest, at least compared to the titles that later got hero mode. Regardless, hero mode has become the series' hard version for its recent titles, mainly only adding increased damage and a lack of recovery. That is, up until Breath of the Wild with Master Mode. Though, before I forget, as I'm certain some people are wondering why I haven't mentioned Master Quest, which was a much harder version of Ocarina of Time originally released for the GameCube, the Master Quest acted as a completely different game, and honestly it takes the crown when it comes to a harder version of an already existing Zelda game, as it took all of Ocarina of Time's dungeon puzzles and revamped them in a much harder way. It is by far the best Zelda game when looking for a real challenge, and luckily Nintendo included it in Ocarina of Time 3D as a completion bonus, while also mirroring the game's world from the original one to add more to this 3DS version. This was something they also added in Twilight Princess HD's hero mode, but this wasn't anything crazy as it sorta acted like the Wii version of the game, which was already flipped compared to the GameCube version. Anyways, with all that history of the previous modes explained, now let's take a look at Breath of the Wild's Master Mode with more perspective. Right off the bat, Breath of the Wild is far different than any other Zelda game, as first and foremost with how you deal with health recovery. The game no longer has hearts found within grass or pots, or having a limited supply of bottles as backup. Instead, you are given an insane amount of options to heal yourself just by pausing the game. From the many meals you decide to cook, or the raw food that you can just straight up eat, to this time being able to hold as many fairies as needed in your inventory without a bottle to capture them in. In general, dying in Breath of the Wild is really easy to avoid after the first few hours of the game, as once the player has farmed a decent amount of food and cooked it, they are usually set when it comes to health recovery. So already the core concept of hero mode that worked in other titles wouldn't really work for this game, as you aren't limited to your healing items, as you have the option of food this time around. Of course though, that doesn't mean you won't come across completely bullshit moments where you are killed at random. Whether it's because you didn't see the enemy fire, or you just misjudged the situation, usually not expecting to take as much damage. Or in general, if you're unequipped with proper armor, you won't expect the enemy to take your entire HP in a single hit. So in Breath of the Wild, you're never truly safe regardless of what mode. But if and when you come prepared for battle and are ready for the situation, you should be more than set on health recovery thanks to the insane amount of meals and fairies you can store in your inventory. So instead, Nintendo seemed to focus on having enemies harder to kill, while allowing them to heal their HP this time around. This made it so that if the player took their sweet time to kill an enemy to play it safe, it would backfire, as if you don't damage the enemy for a couple seconds, they will start to heal it all back up. Well, not all of it, as some enemies will only heal back a certain amount of damage depending on how much they took, making you have to commit to each and every kill and not let them regain much of it back. Now this concept here, it seems fair, right? Especially if you, the player, can heal for as much as you'd like with the help of food. But there's one big flaw in all of this, and that is in Breath of the Wild, weapons break. While I totally understand that this feature gives balance to each weapon and forces the player to collect more and make use of each one efficiently, this doesn't seem fair in Master Mode. Look, I'm not here to join the bandwagon of hating on breakable weapons in Breath of the Wild, as over time I've come to think it really fits the game and even gives more meaning to the Master Sword and the Hylian Shield when obtained. While both of those can also break, they do become Link's most efficient items as they have far more durability than any other sword or shield. And on top of it, you'll never lose them forever. Whether you're buying the Hylian shield from Terrytown or waiting for your Master Sword to restore its power. Regardless, this made it to where in a game where Link has so many amazing weapons to choose from, you can still appreciate the original sword and shield Link has always had and been known for. It really makes you appreciate these weapons this time around, compared to just being handed them in past Zelda games. So trust me when I say item durability is a feature I welcome and can see the balance it gives to the game overall. But this all changes in Master Mode. This honestly made me want to ignore most of the enemies in the wild, as they weren't worth trading my weapons for. But this issue only gets worse when facing bosses. For example, Thunderblight Ganon. Sometimes its AI decides to distance itself for way too long, not allowing me to follow up any attacks, which forces me to deal with it as it heals itself. And this can happen very easily for the Blight Ganons, as most of their attacks require for them to ready themselves in unique ways, yet most of the time it takes too long and allows them to heal back up. I cannot stress how annoying this makes each boss battle. But again, with the regular boss battles, you can easily find ways to cheese them by over-equipping yourself with weapons and arrows. So I can't complain too much in that regard. Where this problem becomes way too much though, is with the game's Master Trials. As throughout the same DLC that is for Master Mode, Link is also given the option to take on the Master Trials in order to power up the Master Sword. And of course you'd really want to power up your Master Sword in Master Mode, as you could really benefit from the additional damage the Master Sword gives and the longer durability it has. Yet those trials become way too tedious to deal with in Master Mode, as Link can only use the weapons and gear found throughout them. And while this was a very fun challenge in normal mode, it becomes almost impossible in Master Mode, as you are only given a certain amount of weapons throughout the trials, and with enemies being able to heal, you can find yourself with all your weapons broken and the enemy still at full HP. Pretty much being unable to progress even if you didn't die, and have to start from the beginning to use your weapons more efficiently. And no, it's not like you can even use your Sheikah Slate as an option, as if you try to slowly bomb them to death, it still has too much of a delay that will allow them to heal back up. And this honestly makes me wonder if Nintendo even play tested the Master Trials on Master Mode, as there's almost no way of beating it unless you perfectly defeat every enemy without letting them heal. But sometimes it's just beyond your control, especially with how the enemy AI can be, making it feel more like a game of luck rather than pure skill. And this same problem is found in the Champion's Ballad DLC quests, as Link has to go back in time to face each and every Blight Ganon with a certain set of armor and weapons. You can't risk letting the Blight Ganon heal, or you will have to redo the battle from scratch to reset your weapons. So again, there are missions that even if you don't die and can handle the enemy in battle, you will still find a roadblock that will not let you defeat the enemy whatsoever. All because they constantly heal their HP back up. And look, I know this is Master Mode, and we should expect more of a challenge from the original game. But this way of handling it doesn't really make the game harder, but rather make the game tedious and feel somewhat unplayable. Like, to me, this doesn't feel challenging, but more so how lucky I get with certain enemy AI. Which honestly makes me think that this entire concept is flawed, especially for a game like this. I know weapon durability plays a big role in Breath of the Wild, and having Master Mode incorporate ways for the player to take it more seriously also makes sense. But it shouldn't straight up block the player from being able to progress at certain points when it has nothing to do with the player's skill. Like, if the delay was at least a bit longer before they started to regenerate their HP again, then that would fix it. Instead, you're playing this game of chance, hoping the enemy doesn't end up too far away from you as you try to kill it as soon as possible. And yes, you could say that it does require skill to make use of each weapon and make sure the enemy doesn't regenerate its HP. But that becomes the only challenge Master Mode offers compared to the normal mode. And let's not forget that weapon durability was never the main reason and why Breath of the Wild was challenging. So having Master Mode's main focus be the one thing most players found tedious rather than challenging is not fun. Master Mode, like Second Quest or Hero Mode, was meant to give the player a different experience when replaying through the game. A more challenging one, sure, but I don't feel that at all with Master Mode. Yes, I get weapon durability does balance Breath of the Wild's combat. And hell, I'd even be down if Master Mode had weapons break faster or be harder to find to add more of a challenge. But when enemies can heal all their damage back to full in the span of seconds of not being attacked, when sometimes it isn't the player's fault, it doesn't feel fair. It just feels like a cheap way of making the game harder. Like there could have been so many other ways for Nintendo to add more difficulty to the game. For example, with a game that's all about finding the many secrets throughout its open world, why didn't Nintendo consider mirroring the game for Master Mode? Similar to how they did for Ocarina of Time 3D's Master Quest and Twilight Princess HD's Hero Mode. While you may think this wouldn't add much, it would definitely help disorient the player when trying to locate its many secrets. Especially in a world as massive as Breath of the Wild. Like, imagine trying to locate the many shrines and Korok seeds again, this time with the entirety of Hyrule flipped. Or if healing is supposedly overpowered within this game, what if you had to use Korok seeds to help expand your cooked meals inventory like you did for weapons? At least this would make use of the many Korok seeds that can't be exchanged for anything. And maybe instead of adding just one Lionel on the Great Plateau that can easily be avoided, why not add them in other areas that force the player to deal with them? Like near Ashika Tower, forcing the player to deal with its attacks as they climb the towers. Or as mentioned before, why not increase the time it takes for an enemy to start healing again? Giving the player a chance to commit to each enemy, and if they decide to take it slow, they will be punished. It's weird to think about because the previous modes in past Zelda games always had a difficulty spike between its normal mode, but one that felt fair. Breath of the Wild's Master Mode just feels cheap, as it makes me not want to deal with any enemies, as it seems like a waste to do so. Making almost every playthrough I've had when returning to the game to play it in normal mode. As I don't see why I should bother with Master Mode when it just becomes tedious, instead of actually adding a unique challenge to it. And it's a shame because outside the enemies being able to heal themselves, there isn't really much else going for it. The one additional thing I liked within Master Mode was with the enemy platforms throughout the sky. It added a bit of a challenge within the sky, but it still was something you could completely avoid. Also, I can't forget the addition of a stronger enemy color, that being gold. I can't deny that seeing a gold Lionel for the first time was nothing but special. Of course though, looking at them is not nearly as fun as fighting them. And aside from that, that's pretty much it. Of course also with the loading screen turning from white to red, really letting the player know it's Master Mode. And how they added a Triforce watermark throughout the HUD. But honestly, the watermark sort of bugs me as it ruins the screen when playing in Pro Mode. So it just gives me another reason to choose not to play Master Mode over the game's normal mode. And I don't know why they felt like it was necessary to add. In past different modes throughout the series, it would add a Triforce mark on the player's file to indicate it was that game mode. But with the red loading screen and the title saying Master Mode, I don't see why Nintendo felt the need to add that watermark. As if the players wouldn't notice each time they loaded the game with it now being red. Regardless, Master Mode feels like a concept that really needed more testing. And especially when past games in the series had game modes similar, but weren't locked behind DLC paywalls. It's like Nintendo put less effort in the DLC when you have to pay for it, but were willing to put effort in previous titles that already had these modes a part of the base game. Like really, you'd think it'd be the opposite way around. Overall, it just makes me wish Nintendo would have done something different and more to this game mode. But what are your thoughts on Master Mode? And what are your thoughts on other game modes within the series that were mentioned in this video? Outside of Master Quest, which is a true hard mode Zelda experience, the Wind Waker's second quest always felt like a great direction for adding replay value. The concept of changing Link's outfit and carrying an item that progresses from the previous playthrough felt like a version of New Game Plus. And if any game could have benefited from something similar to a New Game Plus, it would have been Breath of the Wild. Like, imagine all your Korok seeds, weapons, and materials would carry over to that playthrough, but you still had to find each shrine and take on the divine beasts once again. This would add so much replay value, letting the player find all 900 Korok seeds throughout the span of several playthroughs, instead of having nothing to do but locate them after finishing the main game's quests. Regardless if Breath of the Wild 2 manages to get a mode similar, I hope they find a different way to tackle things. Anyways, that about does it for this video. Please leave a like if you enjoyed, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notifications to stay up to date on all my new videos coming up. As always, I've been ZeldaMaster. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.